Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. For today's case, we're going all the way to Motlhakeng, which is a township in the west of Johannesburg. There aren't any content warnings for this case, and also there aren't any pictures of the perpetrators, so I'm so sorry about that. Father Lionel Sham was born on the 23rd of May 1943, and he was described as someone who was very kind and loving. When he was younger, he would play with his siblings, and you know how like when you're younger you'd play house, like you'd have like a mom and then you have a dad, but like they would do the same thing but it would be different. They'd play like church. So Father Sham would act like he was a priest and he would have confessions. So when he turned 15 and he told his family that he wanted to be a Catholic priest, it wasn't a surprise. After matric, he attended the John Miana Seminary in Pretoria and he was ordained a priest in 1967. All his friends and family were in attendance and they were so proud of him and the person that he was becoming. By the time he was 65 years old, he had enjoyed a colorful career serving God and his parishioners, and he was working at the Our Lady of Africa Roman Church in Motlhakeng, Randfontein at the time of this case. Father Lionel Sham was dedicated to serving people of the community and he had regular churchgoers. He also held a lot of important positions in the church over the years and people would be so drawn to him. He was really good at what he did. He was so good to be around and just spend time with. Everyone that described the type of person who Father Sham was, everyone just always said the same thing. He was kind, he was loving, he was compassionate, he was proud of who he was, he loved his church, he loved serving God. Like everyone just described him the same. Father Sham lived in a house adjacent to the church and his house was just a very decent size. He lived alone, obviously. He had a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen and an office where he worked. On Friday the 6th of March 2009, Father Sham had just finished conducting mass at his Roman church and then afterwards he officiated a small intimate wedding in his office. At around 9:15 that evening, it was clear that he was home. He had called one of his friends who is also a priest, and that was the last time anyone would ever hear from Father Sham. The next day at around 6:45 or 7:45 in the morning, staff members for the church arrived and they noticed that the gate was unlocked, which is very unusual because when Father Sham would go to bed, he would always lock the gate. So they walked in and they went to Father Sham's side, like where his house was, and then they noticed that his red Toyota Corolla was not there. They thought it was a bit strange because he had promised to have mass for young adults, teenagers that morning. So the fact that he wasn't there, they thought it was a bit strange, but they thought that maybe he had other church obligations that he had to get to before holding mass that morning. One of the staff members entered Father Sham's house and he noticed that Father Sham hadn't slept in his bed the night before. He also noticed that there were some things missing, such as the TV, portable radio, as well as Father Sham's computer. So they thought that maybe Father Sham had went to the police station to report the robbery or something like that. Like they just didn't know where he was. They then decided to call a couple of people and just ask when last did they see Father Sham, do they know about like his whereabouts, and no one knew anything about Father Sham, where he was. And this is also when they heard that he was last heard from the night before at around 9:15. Fearing the worst, they then decided to contact police officers and they also tried calling Father Sham, but his phone was off, which wasn't unusual. Father Sham wasn't really good with his phone, so calling him and his phone being off or him not answering wasn't anything out of the ordinary, so it didn't really help much. As the day drew on and no one heard from Father Sham, it became more apparent that something bad might have happened, and everyone started wondering if maybe he had been abducted by these robbers. That night, his friends, families, church members, they all started praying for his safe return, and the parishioners of the church spent the whole night in church praying and singing for Pastor Sham's safe return. The police then went to Father Sham's house to search for any evidence that might tell them about what happened to Father Sham or where he might have went. And then they also noticed that there were blood spots on the floor and there was a knife, and they also took note of things that were missing in the house. They also noticed that there wasn't any forced entries, so they believed that Father Sham knew the person or people who might have abducted him. Then there was a breakthrough in the case. Father Sham's car was found in a city called Denaysville in the Free State, so a completely different province, and it turned out that Father Sham's car had been involved in a car accident and the driver was pronounced dead on the scene. The driver was an unidentified black man, and it appeared as though he was in his 30s. They also discovered that there was someone else who had been in a car who was also another unidentified black man, and he had fled the scene. So as they were like combing through the area trying to find any evidence about what might have caused the accident, the paramedics had arrived on the scene, and obviously because the driver was already deceased, they didn't really have much to it. It was a one-car accident, almost as though they had lost control of the car and then it was involved in a car accident. So the paramedics were on their way back to the hospital, and as they were driving away, they noticed that there was someone on the side of the road and he was clearly injured. He was limping, so they decided to pull over and they just asked the person what was going on, if they needed any help, and then this person told them that he was just involved in a fight and he was just a bit hurt. But as they were looking at him, they noticed that he had pieces of glass in his hair, in his neck, on his clothes. So they found it a bit suspicious, and they knew that no fight could have caused these injuries. So when this person asked for a lift, they decided to give it to him. But as soon as he got into the car, they told him that, listen, there was an accident a few kilometers away from here and we forgot some things there, so we just have to go back, get those things, and then we can leave. So obviously you can't really say much, and then they went back to the scene of the car accident, and once they got there, they noticed that their passenger was becoming more and more like nervous, anxious, and they thought that it was really, really suspicious. Also considering the fact that there was a passenger in the car who had just left the scene of the accident, like 1 + 1 was really making 2. And then they literally just handed him over to police, and it turned out that he was the passenger of Father Sham's car and the black man that they were looking for who had just fled the accident scene. This man was then arrested and taken in for questioning. On the 9th of March, which was a Sunday, a man was walking his dog in a veld in Orange Farm when he noticed that his dog kept going to one particular spot in the veld, and he was just wondering, and he was just very curious about what his dog was seeing and why he was going to this one particular spot. So he decided to go check out what his dog was looking at, and once he got there, he came across a really gruesome scene. He found the body of a white man, and this white man had sellotape covering his nose and mouth. His hands were tied behind his back, and his legs had also been tied with the sellotape. He immediately went to the Orange Farm police station to report what he had just seen, and police officers immediately went there and they found this body, and they determined that this person had just been dumped in the veld, and that wasn't where he had been killed. And they also knew that he had been dumped there because they saw that there were tire marks on the grass, so the grass had been flattened, so they knew that a guard came, dumped him, and then sped off. Father Sham's friends, family, and church members were informed that Father Sham had been found, but unfortunately he wasn't coming home alive, and it was clear that he had been murdered. Everyone was in disbelief, everyone was shocked, confused, and they didn't understand why Father Sham had been killed, by who, because for them he was the nicest, kindest person you would ever meet, and no one ever thinks that a father, like a pastor, a priest, would ever be killed, would ever be murdered in such a gruesome way. So everyone just had so many questions about what had happened, and they just wanted answers. So let's go back to the suspect of the car accident. He was identified as 26-year-old Philip Velaphi Malchus, and he basically spent his first interview just blaming David for everything that had happened and saying that it was his fault. He declined legal representation and he wanted to make a full confession, but before that he wanted to do a pointing out. I've explained what a pointing out is before in some of my other videos, but basically a pointing out is when a suspect just goes to certain places that he had been to at the time of the crime taking place and just showing police officers like this one place and explaining what had happened there. So let's say, for example, this person found someone at the mall, so you'd go to the mall and say, oh, I saw her at this shop, and then my car was parked here, and then I took her to this car, and then I dumped her body here, and then I dumped this there. You know, does that make sense? That's basically a pointing out. So Philip wanted to do a pointing out first, and then he also pointed out where Father Sham had been found and left for dead. So it was clear that he had something to do with Father Sham's murder. Father Sham's body was then taken to the Deep Sloot mortuary for an autopsy, and it was determined that he had 2 causes of death. He had 4 blows to his head and he had also been suffocated. The police then started building a case against their suspect, and in front of the magistrate's court, Philip made a full confession. He basically told the courts that he was friends with Father Sham, so he would often at times go to Father Sham's church and then spend some time with him outside of church, and the 2 of them kind of had a friendship. He was also friends with Daniel Limpefu, and one day he told Daniel that he knew that Father Sham had money in his house, and he knew this because at times when he'd go visit Father Sham would give him money for his son because Philip's son was sick and he just needed help with his medical bills, and I think Philip was also the breadwinner of his family, so Father Sham would give him money so that he would be able to support his parents as well. So he always knew that there was money in Father Sham's house, and he also knew that Father Sham kept the collection box in his home after like church services. So one day he and Daniel were speaking, and then they came up with a plan that they were going to go to Father Sham and they were going to rob him. So on the 6th of March, Philip asked his sister for some money so that he could go to Mutlageng, so he could go visit Father Sham. I'm not too sure where he lived, but he didn't live in Mutlageng or like really close to the church that Father Sham worked at. So him going to Father Sham's church would be like once in a while thing, not like he'd go every single Sunday like religiously. So Philip and Daniel get to Mutlageng, they go to Father Sham's house, and once they get there, they notice that the gate is shut but it isn't locked. So they open the gate and then they go to Father Sham's house and he isn't home. So they then walk a couple of meters away, they go to a public phone or a payphone, and then Philip tries calling Father Sham, but his phone was off. He then told Daniel that no, he knows who Father Sham is, he's probably in a meeting or something, and that they should just wait for a while and then they should call him again. And then they waited for a while and then they decided to call him again, and this time Father Sham answered his phone. So Philip basically just told him that like he was in the area, he tried to go see him, and Father Sham told him that like you're my friend, you're welcome in my home anytime you want. And then after this, Philip and Daniel walked back to Father Sham's house and knocked on the door, and Father Sham opened the door, and he was he just was so welcoming, he was so warm. He offered them some soup. He told them that he had just started eating his dinner for the night, offered them some, and Daniel said that he was okay, but Philip said he could eat. So Father Sham dished up for him, they sat at the table, they were eating their soup, and Father Sham was just talking to Daniel, asking him about like who he was as a person, what he was doing, just small talk. And then after Philip was done eating, he took his bowl as well as Father Sham's bowl to the kitchen, he washed the dishes and then put them on the drying rack, and then he came back to the dining room table, sat at the table, and he looked over at David, and he noticed that David seemed like angry, like David was just upset. And then he asked David what was wrong, and then David looked at him and David told him like, listen, we're not here to eat, we have a job, we came here with a purpose. And then afterwards Daniel took out a knife and then he pointed it at Father Sham, took Father Sham to his bedroom, made him sit on the bed, and then he demanded money. He said, I know you have money, give me money. And Father Sham basically just told them that he didn't have any money and that he had recently taken all the money to the bank, so he didn't have anything. But Daniel was not having it. Daniel really wanted the money, so he took the back of the knife and he kind of hit Father Sham with it under his right eye. And then Father Sham was just like really scared, and Philip looked at him and just said, listen, we're not gonna hurt you, just give us money and we'll leave you alone. So Father Sham told them that they should just look straight and there's a drawer, so they should open the drawer, and in the drawer they will find money. So Philip went to the drawer, opened it, he found 2 envelopes, and then he took out all the money from the envelopes, put it on the bed, and then Philip and David started counting the money, and they ended up with 2,000 rand each. So Philip thought that they were done, they were going to leave, but David was not happy. He wanted more money. So he started shouting at Father Sham, asking him for more money, and Father Sham was just so scared, and he just told him, listen, just go to the bathroom. There's like, I think it's like a little box or whatever that has a couple of towels in it. So he said, just go there, go to the towels, and you'll find more money. So David went to the bathroom, and then he started going through these towels, and he did find more money. Started counting all of the money, and in total they ended up with 7,000 rand each. But again, David was still not happy. David wanted more money, and Father Sham said, listen, I don't have anything, like there's no more money. And then Philip told Father Sham, like, listen, what about that, you know, that box that you have that goes around in church, you know, when people give money to church, you know, offering, like the money for offering. So he's like, I know you have that box of money with offering, like the offering money, so where is it? Because you always keep it in the house. And again, Father Sham said, listen, I told you I took all the money to the bank, so there isn't any money, and that box is currently in the church, but it literally doesn't have anything. But Philip didn't believe him. Philip wanted to go to the church to go see for himself, but ironically David said that they couldn't do that because that would be a sin. After this, after they got all their money, had 7,000 rand total, and David still wasn't happy, David said that they were going to steal some of Father Sham's items, and this is when they decided to take the TV, the portable radio, as well as the computer. And then David also said that they were going to steal Father Sham's red Toyota Corolla. They then took Father Sham and they put him in the back of the car, and I think they took the sellotape and they like bound his legs together as well as his hands, and then also obviously like put a seatbelt on him just to make sure that he wouldn't be able to move and get out of the car. They then drove all the way to David's house, and once they got there, David made a phone call to one of his friends, and the friend came and took the items that they had stolen, and they told this friend to just go get some buyers so that they could get some more money. They then drove to a veld in Orange Farm, and then they threw Father Sham out of the car, and then they took the sellotape and then they wrapped it around his nose and mouth so that he wouldn't be able to breathe and that like he would suffocate. Then they then got back into the car, and then they drove to a local store. They bought a bucket of chicken, and then they bought some alcohol so that they could drink. And then David thought it would be a good idea, like, hey, let's go give let's go give Father Sham some food so he can also eat. So then they drove back to where they had dropped him off, or not dropped him off, but you know, like threw him out of the car. And then once they got there, they noticed that he was already dead. So they just left him, got back into the car, and then they decided to drive to Denaysville in the Free State so that they could have a good night. They could like see some girls, drink, and you know, have a Friday night basically. So they drove all the way to Denaysville. They ended up at a tavern, and they spent the whole night drinking, playing pool, like using the money that they had stolen from Father Sham. And then afterwards they got into the car, and Philip says that's the last thing he remembers. He just remembers waking up and seeing that he was in a car accident, and he just got up and then he just walked away from the scene. And at the time he didn't even know that David was dead, and David didn't make it out of the car accident. I should note that you guys should take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, because obviously this comes from Philip, and the only other 2 people who could corroborate the story are no more. So yeah, that's basically what Philip said happened. A confession also doesn't mean much if police officers don't have more compelling evidence to find the suspect guilty. So they decided to look at the crime scenes again, both at Father Sham's house as well as the scene of the car accident. They found blood evidence, and they found blood evidence in the car as well as in Father Sham's house, and they decided to do a DNA test to see if the blood did belong to the same person, and it did. And this is what police officers needed to have an airtight case. Then finally, Philip Velapi Malchus was found guilty of the murder of Father Lionel Sham and sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, 5 years for kidnapping, and 15 years for aggravated robbery. And that's it for today's case. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to leave a comment. I really like hearing your guys' thoughts and opinions about the cases I cover. Please like and subscribe. It means so much to me and it really helps out a lot. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.